Good evening, and thank you for joining us on another episode of In Other News. With me today on my panel is Erica Adamson, Gabe Salazar, and Angelo Catanzaro. Angelo is a local attorney, along with myself, and then Gabe and Erica are both political analysts. So there's a number of topics that we can talk about today. However, what we're going to do is focus on the situation in Los Angeles. So Erica, Gabe, what's going on in LA? Gabe, that's your home area, right?
Of course. Yeah, an Angelino, born and raised.
Okay.
And so basically the context of this is really escalating starting from June 6th. Federal immigration authorities had gone into the LA Fashion District. They had attempted to deport a group of individuals who were working there, living there. So this whole event, really the riots, as we would, I guess, colloquially call them, really initiated from that day on June 6th. Since then, the federal government, under the administration, has attempted to justify the use of launching National Guardsmen into the Los Angeles area, deploying about 4,000 service members of the National Guard, under the pretext that this was a federalized operation. So given that, the response from the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has decided to launch a civil suit against the administration, indicating that the use of the president's authority to federalize the National Guard was contrary to the laws, illegal. So that's where the current situation stands as far as the riots are going in LA. Obviously, communities are being affected. This is something that the public has outcried against. It's not atypical to Los Angeles, though. I feel like Los Angeles has always been a city of strong resistance to these kinds of actions, especially with immigration. California has a population of at least 30% immigrants, so it's a very close to home issue for many people living in that area.
Mm-hmm. And I think highest undocumented population in the country?
Currently, yes.
Yeah, and so for important context, I mean, Trump, of course, campaigned on a promise of the largest mass deportation operation in U.S. history beginning on day one. He said he wants to deport 15 to 20 million people, which is, of course, larger than the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. And in particular, he's warned that sanctuary cities were going to be targeted. And so in November 2024, the Los Angeles City Council unanimously voted to establish the city as a sanctuary city. And so in a sanctuary city, it is my understanding, the city itself limits its collaboration in the sharing of information with federal immigration enforcement. And I think that action kind of...
You think that precipitated?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, Trump has been explicitly threatening to, I guess, focus the immigration enforcement on sanctuary cities and sanctuary states.
Right. I mean, we've gotten some of that in Vermont, that kind of feedback from the federal government.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what does, I'm a little curious, what does the sanctuary city status imply, or sanctuary state? I mean, is it even something that you can invoke as a governor or as a city, right? Or is it just a policy, let's say an unspoken policy? Or is it something that has protection?
A sanctuary city isn't like one single legal definition, right? It's more, I guess, like a type of policy or like a value that might be reflected in policy. It doesn't have one universal definition.
Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding. I don't think there's like a statutory definition of a sanctuary city or state or region. I think it's largely like a declaration, as Erica was saying.
That's what it is, but the status of declaring yourself a sanctuary city has to be made by either the city council or the mayor or whatever the governing body is, because you're taking certain steps that you otherwise would not take in your non-cooperation or not dealing with ICE the way that ICE wants you to deal with them.
Right. Which under this administration, it's basically creating, you're putting a target on your back, right? Mm-hmm.
I guess the big concern is about federalism at this point, the authority of the federal government to enact these kinds of investigations. The administration says it has legitimacy to do this because of the importance of mandating federal laws. Immigration is part of the jurisdiction of the federal government. So in that sense, how much defensive powers do the cities or the state have in terms of declaring themselves protecting their, sanctuary states.
I mean, good question. I mean, Angelo and I are going to probably talk a little bit more about that, during the course of the program. So, what's actually going on on the ground down there? Like, what's happening? Do you folks know anything about the number of arrests? How's the governor, reacting to this? How are people, Los Angelinos, reacting to this?
Yeah, you want
Well, I mean, core to all of this is the fact that the protests were largely peaceful. I'm not saying they were completely peaceful, but it was nothing that the LAPD could not handle. In fact, on Saturday, June 7th, I believe the LAPD said that the demonstrations were peaceful and that the day, quote, concluded without incident. There were some clashes, but it really wasn't something that they couldn't handle. And so both the mayor of Los Angeles and the governor, they did not ask for any federal assistance with handling these protests.
Right. Did you guys actually have a chance to watch any of them? Anything on TikTok or YouTube or on traditional news? I didn't. So I'm just curious. Was it more than, I don't know, the celebration for like a team winning the Stanley Cup, which could could end up in violence, and cars being overturned and
Right.
bonfires?
It was actually a lot less than that.
Right.
Really?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
There was some, criminal activity, but that you can't prevent that totally when you have thousands of people gathering.
Right, and in a city of millions of people, second
Yeah.
largest city in the country, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, as far as the reports have gone, so some of the reports just mentioned bricks being thrown at cars,
Water bottles being
right, some
thrown,
graffiti.
Yeah.
But as far as more chaotic events, this was something that could have been handled, I think, as Erica mentioned, by the LA or even the state of California's own enforcements.
And that's
the
what
impression you got.
both the city and the state wanted as well.
Right.
I believe Newsom objected, specifically saying that he believed that it would escalate tensions if they brought in any sort of national or federal.
Outside,
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, in
outside
February,
agitators.
Yes.
As they used to say.
even in February, there's another large protest in California.
Right.
Almost the exact same environment and attitude. Not in so much in response to federal immigration actions that were taking place, but just the overview about the president's rhetoric regarding immigration. So, same issue, but at that point, the president did not feel the need to deputize the National Guard and stop, let's say, freeways being, shut down. So at this point, I guess, is what really is the big cutoff point. June 6th, it seems to be the day when this tension escalated between the federal and state governments.
I mean, you've got family and friends there still, right? Like, did they report to you that this is on a large scale, or like what's your understanding from a
No, my family
personal
has
point of view?
shared on social media. They are seeing ICE trucks parading through their streets. So it is becoming a much more visible concern. Especially in their smaller communities. It's not something that you would often see, I think, before this administration.
Right. But what about in terms of what precipitated the federal involvement, the president getting involved? Is there anything on that large a scale that your family or friends have reported to you in terms of the resistance, to the federal response to ICE?
In terms of like them protesting or
in terms of the protests,
yeah,
like how large are these protests?
No, I mean they occupy huge swaths, city blocks of downtown Los Angeles. So there's people who are like actively marching through the streets of downtown LA, down Figueroa, which is one of the biggest streets in there. Highways are being shut down. Again, people are protesting when they can.
Right.
And usually, again, with some disbursement. So after the police have, asked them to leave, then they usually comply. There's nothing like long term.
Yeah. I was watching, a show called Real Time on Max, hosted by, he's a comedian, political comedian, Bill Maher.
Right.
Okay, and he was saying, again, Los Angeles show is filmed out of there. And he was saying that it's limited to a few blocks, and
That's
that
what I
this
saw.
right, and that this was like really overblown in terms of the federal response. Talking about Marines, talking about National Guard.
Yeah.
Defense Secretary.
Right.
Getting involved. Tom Homan making comments. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how big this is. For people watching.
It was a big stunt for Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
That's all that this was.
Right.
The area that, as Erica mentioned, it's I don't know how many square blocks it was, but it was a
5.
small piece.
But we're talking about blocks,
blocks,
right?
okay, of an
Yeah.
area where this happened, okay, and Donald Trump's his what he wanted to accomplish, he has accomplished, okay.
Right.
It's just a media blitz. It's
Sure.
a stunt. He's touting his authority, okay, and whether or not he has the authority to do exactly what he did do is something we can discuss more.
Sure.
And whether or not ICE is performing its duties the way it's supposed to, probably not. But the executive branch has a tremendous amount of authority, and as
Of
you
course,
know,
of course.
in immigration, they can
Sure.
do virtually what they want.
Yeah.
But this is all a stunt. You didn't need the Marines there.
Right.
In fact, and Erica was pointing this out, the research that I did, that between June 7th and June 14th, there were only 561 arrests. Now,
Okay.
that may seem like a lot,
For a large city.
but it was
yeah.
70, that's over 10 days.
Okay.
So roughly what did they say, roughly 70 a day at the most, but these are for like failure to disperse,
Right.
okay? Failure to disperse. There were 14 for looting, a couple of firearm possessions.
Okay.
A lot of them, and most of them were not, I can't say most, but a good deal of them were for violating the curfew.
Right.
And so we have this tremendous amount of criminality going on that we need, 2,000 Marines and 4,000 soldiers.
Right.
Okay? And it was all handled by the LA Police or the Sheriff's Department.
Right. Well, I mean, the police department, from what I understand, when ICE was alleging that they were being assaulted or confronted by protesters, apparently the LAPD was called. It took them 2 hours to arrive at this location of the alleged assault. And supposedly that had a big role, or that's been given credit for the federal response. They said that that was unacceptable, that it took 2 hours. The LAPD cited, that the traffic was really bad because of everything around. I mean, I don't know. I've been out there. Traffic is pretty bad. So, I'm going to give police chief in LA, a little bit of slack on that, maybe, But
It was probably sort of good that they took their time, however.
what's that?
It was probably good that they took their time to
Well-
get to the meat of this, okay? Because
Yeah.
once again, that was a pretext, okay?
Yeah.
Yes, no citizen should put their hands on an ICE person,
Right.
okay? But it happens all the time. How many DEA people are assaulted, okay, in the course of an arrest? How many, how
How many police officers?
police
Yeah,
officers,
sure.
FBI agents, do they call in the Marines? Trump used that as
Right.
a pretext because one of the statutory provisions is to assist in the lawful carrying out of federal law.
Right.
So he jumped on that.
and to protect those folks carrying it out.
Right. Did you
Yeah.
see the size of most of those ICE guys? I'm sure they weren't intimidated.
No, no, right. So, I mean, do we have an idea how many arrests, or you mentioned,
Yeah,
right?
the number that I gave you, the 561, was from the police department, the LA Police. What statistic I couldn't find was how many people were actually detained.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I mean that's sort of relevant also. If they were talking about they detained 5,000, illegals, well then maybe ICE needed a little bit of help, but I don't think the number was anywhere near there.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And that's not to say anything about the process that ICE used with, Trump doesn't believe in due process.
Yeah.
At all. He takes the approach that I can do anything, and if I can't do it, tell me to stop, and then I'll stop.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe. Right,
Perhaps.
maybe. But it's successful for him because he's going to get his big, campaign media blitz out of this. And
But in terms of, I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about, the political fallout, but successful then. I mean, it certainly, before the news broke out, from Iran and Israel this past week, this was the dominating story in the news.
I think it's also successful from the point of view that it is true that most of America wants to see some sort of action
Yeah.
on the immigration front.
Right.
Okay, and I don't know what the percentages was, but it was close to half the country wanted to see people detained and deported.
Right.
So he pleased some of them,
But at the same point, I mean, wouldn't you say, I mean, you guys too, being knowledgeable about, the protests that took place here in our town, in Burlington, this weekend, that it seems like we're breaking a precedent, that LA kind of broke a precedent in that, for the most part, these detentions on the part and arrests made by ICE, they were unhindered up until now. People just basically waited like sitting ducks to some extent until they were caught, and you had onlookers. And now for the first time, I think LA is different in that, it started a new movement where people have gotten involved and said, these are people in our community. The three of us were talking earlier today about the fact that services in areas where there have been a lot of detentions and arrests of undocumented people, services are disappearing, which was expected. Because a lot of folks, these folks are doing a lot of, work that to a lot of people in our country, either we call it menial or difficult or not the fun work that, people aspire to. And as a result, things like babysitting, things like work in agriculture. I mean, the president did back down on the agricultural industry in terms of detentions earlier this week, and the hotel industry and the restaurant industry. The Secretary of Agriculture had a conversation with the president and said, this is not sustainable because there's no plan B put into effect. Who's replacing these jobs?
Actually, let me jump in here. Actually, there was a new Pew Research survey out. I guess it was from June 2nd to 8th, 2025. But the majority of Americans believe that Trump's immigration policies will make the U.S. economy weaker. That's 46%. Only 34% believe it'll be stronger, and 19% believe there'll be no impact.
Right.
And this is, of course, all Americans, not just Democratic
but
voters.
the reason that it's still successful for Donald Trump is because he will say it is.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's who listens to him. I do think the message is reaching more people, but the people that we have to reach is people who didn't vote. Okay, I mean, that's our opening here is the 2026 elections, and hopefully
for the midterms.
Right. I mean, we have to start. We're not going to change what he's doing. The courts aren't going to stop him from doing it the way he wants to do it. I mean, they say stop. He stops, he does it a different way. He doesn't care about due process. I mean, we hear about what these detainees are going through and they're not getting their rights. They're being locked up in rooms. They're not having lawyers.
And not enough food.
And not enough food. And that hasn't changed, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Okay, and so he's winning.
But this is about framing the narrative, right? I mean, both sides have their base. The president has his base. The Democrats have their base, are people that are aligned with the left. They're not going to move. This is about undecided voters, as like the last number of elections have been about.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And we did not succeed. We, the Democrats, or wherever you put yourself, not with Trump, didn't succeed in moving enough people to the voting booth. I mean,
So will this narrative change things?
That's what I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, I hope that it does. You pray that it does. You would think it would when they're seeing all this, and then you drill down on the fact that he doesn't care what the law says.
Right.
Okay. He actually has some good lawyers who make up some interesting interpretations of what things mean.
Right.
Okay. And that's what baffled the district court judge.
Yeah.
It was like, there's no rebellion here. There's no insurrection here.
Right.
But apparently there was a Supreme Court case back in the early 1800s that said the president decides what that means.
Right, and it's not just rebellion; it's danger of rebellion, which that's a pretty broad. The parameters are quite broad in interpreting what that is. I wanted to focus on like some of the stats that Erica mentioned.
Sure.
Where does that leave the country, though? You mentioned 34% think that this is good for the economy. Mm-hmm. So what's the premise that this is going to give, not Native Americans, but native-born Americans, jobs that they...
Right, some advantage, sure.
That they didn't want to do before, but that perhaps the income levels will go up and make them more palatable?
I would like to see where that 34% came from.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, because up here it's going to kill us. Okay.
Right.
Okay, in a lot of places it's going to kill us. So I don't think it's going to help the economy at all. But I would imagine there are certain sectors where maybe illegals, okay, are pushing out opportunities for Americans,
Yeah.
citizen Americans. I tend to doubt it. I mean, I just don't. I can't imagine a situation, or I'm not aware of a situation where that actually occurs.
Right.
Because, like you were pointing out, Native Americans, they don't want those jobs.
No.
And they do a lousy job when they have them anyway. So.
Right. Yeah.
Touche.
Right.
Americans that are native born as opposed to
Right,
Native
Native
Americans.
Whatever, yes, okay.
Right.
So, I think part of the narrative, though, that the administration has campaigned on and it's currently pushing is, again, that there's some sort of economic disincentive to having these immigrants around. That they're either taking public benefits, or that they're taking jobs, or that they're somehow, again, like Trinidad, right, the Venezuelan gang, that they're all part of this gang or
Right.
crew of vigilantes who are harming American citizens.
Didn't J.D. Vance blame the price of housing on
Yeah,
immigrants?
no,
I'm sure he-
absolutely.
yes, I'm sure
right,
he
right.
would.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
causing a shortage.
Some of those things are true, though. I mean, that's the part that we yes, there are criminals who are illegals. Okay, there are, it does have an impact on some jobs, but it's all blown out of proportion.
Right.
And I think we're going to be for the worst of it. Okay, if he still decimates some of these industries, and it makes no sense. But
Angela, I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of refocus
sure.
based on time that we have. So let me ask you a question. We've kind of played around with this topic a little bit. Did the president exceed his authority in sending, federalizing the National Guard and sending Marines in?
from one lawyer's interpretation, yes,
Okay.
and it'll be.
So you're basically taking the Solicitor General of California's point of view, that
Yes,
and the Governor of
I
California.
think the intent of all the statutes, when you read them together,
Yeah.
okay, was that this authority should be exercised when there's a serious threat to the security of the United States or the property of the United States, because there's an actual insurrection or a rebellion or a serious threat of that. And basically, the United States is saying, we don't have to do any of that. We can just do this if it's the president's interpretation of what's going on, and that gives him the authority. But I don't know if there's a court who is going to disagree with him.
Right. Well, it's before the Ninth Circuit right now, the Court of Appeals. Two Trump appointees on that bench and one Biden appointee, and they are focused on the fact that the president has, like as you said, the ability to interpret what is rebellion and what is danger of rebellion.
Right. And an interesting question by one of the Trump appointees was to this United States, what if there was actually no violence and no commotion? Okay, and I don't know exactly how we phrased it.
Right.
Could you still invoke this authority to militarize local police or militarize the National Guard or bring in the Marines? And his answer was absolutely.
Yeah.
So we know what their definition or their understanding of what those terms are.
Well, the president's attorney basically made an argument in court saying that the president's decision to move ahead with this, to federalize the National Guard, that this was unreviewable. That's a quote
Yeah.
by a judge, by a federal judge. Because, his claim was that this lines up an argument between the executive branch and Article III judges.
That's what he's trying to do, but clearly
Yeah.
anything.
Does it?
I think Trump, of course, that's what he's trying to do, because he thinks he's going to have the public favor in his favor for his 2 years of this being a stunt. I think the bottom line issue is that this authority is still either constitutionally based. It derives from the Constitution or it derives from statutes.
Right.
Okay, and it is the job of the judiciary to interpret the law. So
Right.
that statement that he can do anything he wants without judicial review, there I totally disagree with him, and I hope the courts do also.
Right.
They could say there's not enough facts to stop him, but they can't say that if it derives by statute. You mean he can also determine what the statute means? Isn't that our job?
Right. So let's shift to the next thing that we wanted to talk about: political fallout.
Right.
What's going to happen? The governor of California, other notable figures in that state, What do you guys think?
Right. I mean, like I think as Angela mentioned, this seems to be like a very big political stunt on behalf of the administration, trying to show that it is working towards the goal of immigration enforcement. It's just coming back to blow him. And I think, again, he's meeting more and more resistance when it comes to the legal issues. He doesn't actually have that grounding to, stand on that. And I think the country is heading towards this criticism of this administration. Those who can see what's going on, I think they're being more apt to see that the person they elected is kind of crossing over lines that they themselves would not want.
But who are some of the beneficiaries here? I mean, what do you guys think of, the Governor Newsom now?
I mean, I think he's stepping up for the moment.
Yeah.
I know a couple of weeks ago on the show we were making fun of him for having right-wing figures like Charlie Kirk on his podcast, and being all nice to them. And now he's saying, Trump, he's a tough guy. Wasn't he do that? Why doesn't he do that when the Trump administration threatened to get him arrested? He said he knows where to find me. But you know what? Lay your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Lay your hands off these poor people who are just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes. Been here 10 years. So I thought that was really cool.
That's pretty powerful.
He kind of, I think he's stepping up for the moment. He's,
Right.
I guess, being a stronger figure on the Democratic side.
Is he the leader, the de facto leader of the Democratic Party?
I wouldn't go that far.
No? Okay, hardly.
For a minute.
And I hope not.
Okay.
Although I think what he's doing now, he is standing up better now. And Erica and I had disagreed over when he was doing that little touting towards or leaning towards the right a little bit.
Moving towards the center, yeah.
I think that that's something that we're going to have to do. Okay, because there's still a large contingent of people, okay, you have to compromise. And you can't compromise from an extreme left or an extreme right position. So when he was doing that, I mean, I didn't like the audience that he was keeping or but.
Well, we could have debated them a little bit, like on the podcast.
Right. Well, I did not see exactly what went on,
Yeah.
but the point is that that's okay. You have to you got to be moderate in order to make progress. We've had that discussion also. Not that
You
I want.
agree? No, you're shaking your head.
Not that I care to have the moderate view, but I
Right.
think to get anywhere, we have to moderate a little bit.
But
and
you're,
try to
you're
compromise.
focused again on that undecided voter, right? That makes or breaks the American election these days?
Or even some of the Trumpies, okay? That
Okay.
that some of them aren't that outrageously unreasonable. Most of them are, okay. And but they have a right to their position too. But I think we can penetrate even a small element of that if we have the right message and we do the right thing.
Okay, so yeah, we're kind of winding down here. What any news stories people are following, or not just news stories, but other trends, political, cultural, anything? You start, Angela.
I mean, the
As
Rafael
our guest of honor.
The Rafael Devers trade from Red Sox to the Giants.
Okay.
Okay, that was the biggest news event of the week for me.
For you?
Yeah.
Okay.
As a diehard Red Sox fan.
Oh, diehard Red Sox fan.
Okay, but you were a Giant fan? No, a Dodger.
Dodgers.
You guys already
course.
stripped the Red Sox.
How about you, Gabe? Any news stories that you're following?
Yeah, I guess kind of related to that. I mean, the Dodgers are currently, they had their national anthem sung in Spanish, and a Latina artist who sang it in Spanish got flack from the Dodgers. So they banned her. They said never work with us again.
Oh, wow.
And
This
so-
was unexpected, or these things
the artist,
usually?
right? The artist did not disclose that she was going to sing the national anthem in Spanish.
Oh,
When did
Okay.
this
So-
occur? Recently?
Yeah, within the last week. And so, right, she's getting the fallout from that. But I think the majority of Angelinos are not opposed to that. They were just, kind of unexpected. But either
What
way.
about the Latino players?
Exactly. No objection. So
No, but did they object to the way the Dodgers are treating her?
that I would have to look
Okay,
into more.
all right.
Yeah, we'll have to see exactly. I'm sure
How
they
about
have
you?
a
I'm sorry.
union.
Yeah. How about you, Erica? What are you following these days?
I have been following the New York City Democratic mayoral primary.
Yeah.
I've been really into this, particularly the candidacy of Zohran Mamdani, who's a 33-year-old Democratic socialist, who is the, I guess, leading challenger against Andrew Cuomo. He was recently endorsed by both AOC and Senator Sanders, and he's been focusing on affordability for the working class, freezing the rent, free public transit, free health, child care, expanded housing, taxing the 1%. It would be a bit of a long shot. It remains to be seen if he'll pull this off, but it would
Right.
be I mean, he has narrowed the gap in the polls a lot. And so the election, I believe, is a week from today.
Yeah.
What are the difference? What's the poll numbers? Does Cuomo really have a shot at winning the primary?
I don't know what the exact
But you said he's narrowing
numbers
it.
are, but it's narrowed a lot in the last month. I believe
Yeah, 40%.
Cuomo's up like 6% maybe at the most.
Okay, that's close. Yeah, it's not the margin of error, but
Yeah.
it's pretty close.
I mean, I guess it just depends on turnout at this point and enthusiasm. But I think Bernie endorsed him yesterday.
Right.
So
Great. I'm just following this little conflict between Israel and Iran. It's probably not even real. It's fake news. But that's all we have for today. Join us next month, and thank you.